like, as well as what their organization does as a whole. We'll go ahead and start to my left with Eric. Go ahead and jump in, sir.
All right, I'm Eric Gould, and I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Curb. Curb is a company that makes the world's most intelligent energy monitoring system for residences and small businesses. I have been working in the field of product design for about 30 years. I've held executive positions at Microsoft and Yahoo, and I joined Curb about a year ago, first as an investor, and having rolled up my sleeves and enjoying the team, enjoying the leadership, decided to join the company. And so we'll look at how a product like this fits into the ecosystem, increases energy literacy, and ultimately saves money and saves energy for everybody involved.
You guys in the back here okay? Kind of, sort of. Let's scoot that forward then. Go ahead, John.
I'm John Stasio. I'm the president of the Large Public Power Council, and we we're a public policy organization in Washington, D.C. I represent the 26 largest municipal utilities, electric utilities in the United States. And formerly, I was the CEO at SMUD, which is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District out in California. So I've been in D.C. about a year and a half and working on national public policy issues, but also helping our members inform decisions they're making about the transition that our industry's in.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Wolf, and I'm the marketing director for electricity and smart grid at Itron. I work out of our office there in San Diego, California, and have global responsibilities for our smart grid systems for utilities around the world, not just in North America. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Itron, but the core of our business is really selling to the utility market. And over the course of our 35-year history, we've probably connected about 150 million smart meters across electricity, gas, and water for utilities, both here and countries around the world. Glad you made it a second.
Hi, I'm Travis Smith. I'm from Sensus. Sensus manufactures smart meters, various other types of metrology devices, communication systems, provides data hosting, analytics, and smart applications to manage those utility infrastructures. Typically, we're selling to municipalities and utilities to provide hardware and services. I am in charge of the North American water portfolio for metrology and smart water applications. They affectionately refer to me as the chief plumbing officer of the company.
Thank you. For those of you out there, listen, we want to try to make this as interactive as we possibly can. We've got some questions we're going to discuss that we think are things that are possibly of interest to you, but if there is at any point a question you have, something you want to delve deeper into, please don't be afraid to raise your hand. You don't have to wait for the Q&A at the end. We will have one, but feel free. We're more than happy to delve deeper into something if it's of interest. That's why you're here. We want you to get something out of it, so please ask if you have a question. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and start here with John. As the president of the Large Public Power Council, I think you're in a really good position to help us understand what's driving this overall market. Can you give us some of your points of view with regard to the key drivers behind the adoption and the implementation?
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, the market has changed significantly in the past several years. I know when most utilities originally considered putting in AMI systems or smart meters, it was really on the focus on operational savings. That was a lot of what the business cases were built upon, whether it was improving outage management, reducing truck rolls, being able to do remote disconnect and connect. And so a lot of the savings that prompted investments in smart meters were really focused in kind of an insular way. It was for utilities to be able to better manage their operational costs. Then over time, the second wave became, we started to see new technologies, distributed resources, other technologies that would benefit from integration, and the ability to utilize those technologies by having rate designs that allowed better reflection of the price signals of when energy was the most expensive. And now I see a lot of folks using smart meters more as part of the underlying platform, technology platform, Eric said it right. I mean, we've got a physical network, now it's a digital network, and it's an ecosystem, and smart meters become a very important part of delivering some of the data that's necessary to best manage that ecosystem and to provide kind of discrete customer relationships. When I was at SMUD, we had 650,000 customers, and I could tell you 550,000 of those customers were residential. We treated them as a homogeneous single customer. We had no real way to differentiate them. Smart meters now provides different usage profiles to where you can segment customers and frankly provide them custom offerings that are more unique and more responsive to their needs. So I would say the market has evolved where we have about 60 million smart meters now, and how utilities are using them, I think has changed significantly.
Gentlemen, anything else to add to that?
Sure. From the water side, we're seeing just the evolutionary trend of smart water deployment, where we're beginning to monitor not just usage from a time of use and that consumption portfolio that varies day to day, hour to hour, season to season, or year to year, but in addition to that, valuable information that detects tamper, theft, and potentially even leaks at the consumer side, which can help cities avoid write-offs of bad debt or protect the personal property of the residents. So it's become an exciting time for them to utilize that smart meter technology to get some additional benefits beyond the traditional cost savings pieces that John cited earlier of reducing truck rolls. There are other intangible benefits to those smart meter technologies in the water space.
And I would only add, just to reinforce the connection between this technology and what the utilities are doing with it, and the broader theme of the conference here is that there's just tremendous opportunity from a smart city perspective to reduce waste, to improve operations, reduce costs, all those things that ultimately accrue to making a city more livable, more sustainable, and more economically vibrant. But I think there are some challenges there in the economic model, the buying model. If a utility such as John worked at, that's a municipality, they may have a little more nimbleness in doing some smart city things, whereas a large investor-owned utility serving a city may have regulatory barriers to doing new things outside its core energy delivery mission and so forth. So, we talk a lot about technology at this conference. A lot of the challenges in terms of broadening this value stream are human. Their collaboration, their leadership, their vision, groups who haven't traditionally worked or talked to each other, getting together and charting a course. So,
excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to move here to you, Eric, and ask a quick question for you. You at Curve are in an interesting position with an energy management solution. You've got it for customers and for businesses. I'm curious what types of end user perceptions, the goals, kind of behaviors you're seeing from your side of the fence with regard to adoption of smart meter technology.
Yeah, so Curve is one step higher resolution than a smart meter. It's a little box, and it goes inside the breaker panel, and then connecting up to each of the breakers inside the home is a CT clamp. So it measures how much electricity is being used at any given time. And there's a number of different variables that are measured. It's not just the load, but we're looking at power factor and other variables that gives us kind of a detailed fingerprint of exactly what's going on inside the home. So when people are able to see that information on a second-by-second basis in real time, the energy literacy factor goes up dramatically. So to your question, what happens when people understand what's going on? Their behavior changes automatically. It would be as if, how many people in this audience look at your energy bill every month?
Wow.
So that's impressive. So you're at this conference, obviously. What we've found is that most people don't look at their bills very often. They don't understand kilowatt hours. It doesn't mean anything to them. What they can equate is how something compares to a 60-watt bulb, right? And how many 60-watt bulbs it would take for some appliance to be running. But when you watch people who've never seen their energy data, it's like biofeedback, if you will. When you finally get to see what's going on inside your body, when you finally get to see what's going on inside your home, it's enlightening. People discover things about one HVAC system versus another HVAC system. They discover that one of their solar arrays isn't producing any power, and who knows how long it's been down, because they don't walk by the inverters and have any idea. They discover that their hot water heater has been running constantly for some unknown reason. And that changes behavior. They discover that their Christmas lights are costing way more than they thought, and change those out. They change the schedule. We work with businesses who discover that they're lighting areas of parking lots at strange times of night when they don't need to be, and wasting tons of money because they just don't see it. There's no feedback. So the biggest impact is that literacy, that awareness can't change but help behavior.
Great, that's a great answer. I'm going to kind of go with that one here with regard to data, because you talked about how some of the access to data changes their behavior. Travis, we had some discussions beforehand. We talked a little bit about, there's remote data gathering, there's efficiencies that are enabled. Do we have some good examples we can share with the group of what we're seeing happen with that data? Where is it being used? How is it being used in a larger scale to the point of the conference in a smart city?
Sure. So there are various examples that we gained from some of our customers on the municipal side where they provided access to the citizens on the water piece. It's actually changed and solicited conservation of the usage, particularly in places in the West where the resources are constrained and they're trying to minimize the use or the over-irrigation. So we've seen a significant reduction in Reno, Nevada by actually changing from a 2-day-a-week watering system to a 3-day-a-week watering system. But because they made the citizens more aware of when to use it, they actually reduced the entire consumption. They found that citizens doing it twice a week were actually overwatering their lawns. And by changing it to 3 days a week, they paid more attention. They felt that they had more opportunity to do it and reduce the consumption. Similar patterns have occurred in the electric business of making citizens aware of their time of use, as Eric said earlier, and the information changes the behavior in most cases. I think the challenge is most of those consumer information portals that are provided, the adoption rate has been relatively small, and we have a huge opportunity to capture that going forward if we look towards ways to communicate directly to the consumer versus having them fetch the data. It may be an opportunity for us to really make that more valuable proposition for the residents.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, just the dissemination of the information. Is there anyone that maybe has an example of where we've done a better job of that, as well as other examples of what we've learned from the data?
I would just piggyback on the comment about if you do provide information, transparency, but you also have to have something that's actionable with it, because if it's not, then people will quit looking at it, they'll quit using the data. When I was at SMUD, and I know many of our other member utilities have used O-Power, which was one of the early behavioral models for energy efficiency, and you basically just sent a letter saying, using publicly available data, say citizens in similarly sized homes and so forth use this much, here's how much you use. And it was interesting, just providing that letter was enough to get people to change their behavior and try to reduce their usage without even understanding what measures they might do, but just it sent a conservation signal. Now they become much more sophisticated where they can say you can also provide these devices, you can buy them and they'll create energy efficiency investments for you, and these are the right ones to do. The one barrier I would say, and one of the reasons I think we have some slow adoption, is that not everything in the energy system, right now we're struggling over how to price carbon. You really don't have it reflected in the cost of energy. So typically in many, many parts of the country, energy bills are still relatively low. So one of the barriers we had was people were not gonna do that much around reducing electricity unless they were true believers, because the reality, if they were getting an $80 bill a month, $80 a month bill, they weren't necessarily motivated by economics. So I think one of the things that we need to figure out is, we're still, I think, early in this curve about providing information and actionable solutions for people that will really compel them to use less energy or do things different.
So, you know, I'd add to that and say, and because we face this at Curb, there are different types of people who want to monitor what's going on inside the home. There are some that care about saving energy. There are some that care about saving money. There are some that just want to be cool having a smart home. And what we've discovered is that working, for example, with a retirement community, where the individual units and the individual homes are not billed for their electricity. It's built into their package. But what management does care about there are safety issues and maintenance issues. So when you have a very high resolution meter, like a Curb or a super smart meter, we'll call it a super smart meter, then you can see patterns. You can see where there's a higher resistive load that's been sitting on for a long time in the bathroom and say, hey, send a push notification out to their phone or their watch and say, it looks like you left your curling iron on. Go check it before you burn your house down. Or if that high resistive load has been on a long time in the kitchen, hey, maybe it looks like you've left your oven on or your stovetop. Go check that for safety. And the fingerprint of other sorts of appliances reveals what's going on. We're able to see, and I'm sure you see the same sort of thing with your water data. In an HVAC system, for example, you can see in the energy patterns the difference between a coolant leak and a capacitor that's gone bad, and get someone out to do maintenance before the entire system blows. So there are all sorts of reasons besides saving money that would cause people to want to have high resolution access to their energy and resource data.
So let me piggyback on that question a little bit here and just ask the rest of the panel. We talked about the dissemination of information. Clearly there are different motivators for people to change behavior. Where does the onus lie on helping educate? Is it the utilities? Is it the city itself? Where do we educate the people about what they could be getting, what they could be gaining, things of that nature? Any thoughts?
Well, I think to some extent a robust market will do that in and of itself. We talked about some of these examples on the consumer side. In this 1.0 phase of consumer energy management, consumer engagement, it's been pretty limited, and frankly, to a lot of people, somewhat disappointing. You get, green segments and geeky segments that are doing it, but the overall adoption, certainly from the way the utility looks at it, but the market in general, is really not where a lot of companies and people had hoped it'd be. So we have to look ahead to this consumer engagement 2.0, and I think that's much more along this line here, where we are providing experiences, customized experiences that you've gotten used to with your mobile devices and shopping and banking and investing and whatever else you're doing online, to where you're making decisions and preferences saying, I want to be green today, I want to reduce carbon emissions, I want absolute reliability because I'm doing something at home or at my work that requires that, or I want comfort, or I just simply want to save money, and the system works together to do that. And that's where we're marching to at 2.0, and I think when we start to have some uptake on that market, and these components fall into place here, I think the consumer will catch on very quickly.
Shawn, Travis, either of you have extra staff?
The only thing I would want to tap back on something that Tim said earlier, and that was the idea that one of the things that's kind of probably a necessary element is we've got this data, we've got smart, intelligent infrastructure now in communities. But I will say I haven't seen that much collaboration in many communities where you actually have municipalities getting together and say, hey, we've got this digital network, we could read everything under one, we could provide some sort of collaboration that would benefit the community. And I still see a lot of municipalities and utilities and third parties, everybody's kind of staying in their lanes and they're trying to optimize around their own piece of the pie. When that integration happens and that collaboration happens, I think you have an exponential growth in what the benefits are to consumers.
Well, why aren't they collaborating?
You know, it's funny, when, again, when I was in Sacramento, we had 6 incorporated cities in the county that were within our footprint. And so when we did our smart meter rollout and we put in a digital network, we went to all the communities and said, we're gonna have all this electricity data that can inform planning, it can inform a lot of different things that the community does. And by the way, we could all read all of our devices under one network. Why have multiple networks? And it was just too hard for people to make decisions. They had different organizational cultures, they had different pressures on them. And so the one example I'd point to real quickly, I went to Tokyo a few years ago, and there's an organization there called NEDO, N-E-D-O, which is a public-private organization, and they have basically scalable energy management systems that they're testing. Starts with the home, with PV, your EVs, your storage, and then, but they also have the grid feed, they also have weather feeds, and so this all scales up, and the idea at the end of the day, Toyota City has created a 400-some home community that's all smart and it's scalable because it's all interconnected. So that to me, I think, is a pretty interesting vision, but I've not seen it too much yet in the United States.
Interesting. I see a couple questions out here. Let's go ahead and start on this side in the back. Go ahead.
So kind of piggybacking off what you just said, I'm interested to hear your perception on kind of going open source with networks and with meters as the market kind of matures a little bit and first generation and now maybe second generation meters and networks that certain utilities maybe have implemented. Now they're going to look for new solutions and we start to hear more about open source, but what does open source look like in the future for AMI, for meters themselves and meter systems and meter manufacturers?
I think Travis, we talked a bit about that, or Tim, what do you two?
So as all the systems from an AMI, AMR perspective begin to mature, I think the collaborative value of that data will disseminate into various corners of the space and can be useful to a lot of different organizations as they tie them together. I think where we are today is still the step that John iterated of, can we get more use out of one infrastructure? Can we use a set of infrastructure that migrates water, gas, electric, lighting into something that's useful and tying together, bringing that one time of use. As you begin to agglomerate the use of power, water, energy in segments, the value becomes larger to affect change with. And as we go through those pieces, the other portion of the accessibility and the openness of the data begins tying that in with metadata to infuse it to the GIS systems, to understand where and when those things happen. That's where the real value begins to appear in the 2.0 system. Can we tie weather data into water usage? Can we tie more weather data into energy consumption? Can we be more strategic in those areas? Is a huge opportunity for us in the future for the openness of the data.
Yeah, I would add that, you put your finger right on the issue there. For instance, at Itron, our entire growth strategy and R&D investment is predicated on the idea of open networks that can readily, cost-effectively, accept new applications, new devices beyond the utilities, and that's also reinforced in the marketplace today when we receive a tender or a request for proposal from a utility. Increasingly, almost now without exceptions, there are are very specific requirements and questions about street lights, other types of telemetry and control for urban areas, and that's really becoming the norm. And it's taken a while, standards and all this, that's like sausage making over years, but these networks are opening up, and the market is adopting them, and there's a lot more possible than there was 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago.
Turns out that people are very competitive, and even those of us who aspire to not be competitive in our daily lives have it in our nature, and that is a positive thing when it comes to resource utilization, because with information about a neighborhood or about a nation or about a planet, you can position one person's usage data, whether it's water or whether it's electricity or whether it's particular appliances or particular behaviors in relation to an appliance or a device. And then we can compare and say, your neighbors are using this much less than you. Bring it on. And so we've played some with creating competitions between people, and a number of energy companies have started to report how that one consumer compares with their neighborhood, and the results are pretty interesting. Having that data be available, whether it's open, I'm not familiar because I work in a slightly different space from what exactly is being referred to as the open data. But Curb is building this census of data from its population of users, which allows us to build artificial intelligence systems for predictability about the way that particular appliances work and the way that they behave. And it then enables customers to then be compared with what's the state of the art in refrigerators today? How is my refrigerator working? What should I be getting? And then build those relationships with the brands out there who have things to sell that will improve people's lives and increase their bottom line.
The one thing I would say about open source as well is that one of the reasons the sausage making has been slow, and we were talking about it a little bit up here before we started, is that actually utilities being historically regulated monopolies, their regulators are actually behind the curve on this. Technology and consumer interests are driving the change that we're seeing, but regulators are, and even policymakers, while they're pushing it on one hand, on another hand, for utilities anyway, there's a lot of concern about cyber, there's concern about privacy, there's concern about security, and nobody's willing to have a system that creates the potential for essential reliability services not being provided. In fact, I told the story a couple weeks ago. I'm in DC now. I go down one hallway at Department of Energy, and they said, we've got to open this up and make this wide open. You go the next hallway over, and they say, we got to tighten this thing down because of privacy. So we're a little bit in a schizophrenic time of, which is probably normal in change, but I do think we're heading to an open world. It's just, for utilities, we're being tasked with saying that has to be done in a way where cyber and privacy and essential reliability can be maintained if you're going to be operating these networks.
Go ahead. We'll get you next.
So I wonder if you'll comment on this. I know that in many communities and cities, the ownership models are a bit fragmented in that a city can have the electric meters supplied by you, and they may also own street lights. And then the gas company has gas, and the city itself has their own water department. So to the extent that each the ownership is fragmented, I mean, the homeowner eventually wants to know what's their total asset footprint, not just their electric footprint or their water or the gas, but what's my footprint across all assets, all services that I use, and yet you go to the water folks, they don't talk to the lighting folks or the electric folks, so different owners, how do you get, is that not in the way of this commonizing of data, because the ownership is different of the assets? Is secondly, some people use electric utilities, they make money by selling kilowatt hours. I mean, unless they get regulatory, revenue recovery, they're not incented to help you reduce your draw, right? Because that's producing the revenue, and that's to make whole that. So they don't have incentives in place from a business standpoint to recover that lost revenue from efficiency. So also, if you can comment on the ownership fragmentation, how you get around that? Is that really an issue going forward? And this idea that the business model's been a bit outdated as well.
So I do think that's an important point. I do think that, we have a history of communities and private organizations making those determinations and states as to how they want to have those utility services, whether they be electric, water, gas, whatever the case may be, how they want those to be organized and delivered for the benefit of their consumers. I think the thing that might be able to stitch it together is this idea of technology and networks and data. You have a physical reality and a physical infrastructure, but on top of that, as you create digital networks, there's a way to kind of make the ownership model secondary to the place where that information is kind of stored and utilized by consumers. So I think that that's coming, but I do think that there are some natural barriers because, again, culturally, I just know it from my own experience, not all communities collaborate that well on those things, and some do. And to your point about utilities, investor-owned utilities, many of them now are what they call decoupled, so that their fixed cost recovery is separate from their revenue. So they have taken away this incentive that you need to sell more to make your revenue. Where I think that the issue for the investor-owned utilities is different. Part of what they get paid on is their capital investment. So they're actually incented to put more steel in the ground and build big systems and so forth. So that's something that the regulators still need to work their way through. And there's been discussions. There's something right now called the 51st State, which is a solar electric power organization. It used to be solar electric, it just changed. But anyway, the 51st State is an analysis of what does a regulatory model in the future need to be like to facilitate this more interactive and provide the right incentives to where we're trying to go versus where we've been.
Yeah, I would add in that the technology community is adapting to those challenges. For instance, at Itron, we are looking to own and operate or operate more networks, use the cloud, and whether the customer is the electric utility, the gas utility, or the city, or someone else, provide the data, provide the analytic outcomes, or whatever they're seeking on a sort of a software as a service model. I think that's where a lot of that'll go, and that will address some of the concerns you mentioned. At the same time, as John said, that sort of CapEx, OpEx struggle at the utility, I think that needs to adjust, because if there's third-party ownership of the network, whether it's Itron or AT&T or Sprint or whoever, then that sort of rejiggers that equation there. As for the business model, yes, many utilities are decoupled. I think there is this concern on the part of our customers who are utilities that customer franchise that has always been a sure thing for them is under threat, as is the volumetric business model. So I think what we're seeing in some of our more progressive customers is, okay, how do we get ahead of this, and what does this look like in the future? And I think it goes to the utility defining some strategies to be, what are we going to deliver? And maybe it's more outcomes, and maybe it's more experiences around reliability, around clean energy, around energy efficiency, in which they're trusted advisors to their customers. So that is in flux as well, but things are moving.
Well, I think those experiential factors are key. The amount of money that an REP will lose by customers becoming more efficient, I believe probably pales in comparison with their loss of an entire customer to a competitor who's going to help them be smart about managing resources. So I see in the deregulated markets, integrating smart data into their offering and advisory service with real-time data to help people be smarter about their own usage is a competitive advantage.
You had one, sir.
Yeah, my question, I think, is a little bit of a follow-up to that, and it's specific to cities and city managers, as I saw in your write-up here. And it speaks to the fact that cities who manufacture water or produce water and distribute water, now you've got the water meters that are out there. So my question is, what are city managers asking for now or next? Sort of like an AMR 3.0 perspective, right? So I'm managing the city, I'm getting some information, mostly volumetric, right? So are there any other things out there that they're looking for that are not there yet? You answered it partly because I think you said some of the RFQs, for example, have references to streetlights and so forth. So really kind of saying, okay, where are we going as far as city managers?
Sure, that's a great question. So, as you discussed earlier, there's certain aspects of lighting, there's other data that you can bring into a network in a water system that's beyond just the straight up metrology piece of the consumption. I look at the classic piece of that's the odometer of your car. Where we're going in the future is to be able to measure things such as pressure within the water system and overlay that with the consumption and the flow. Now, a long time ago, North Carolina State University gave me a degree in engineering. I managed to cram 8 semesters of engineering and 10 semesters of activity. I did remember one key thing, and that was the water flowing through a pipe was a factor of the velocity, the pressure, the friction, and unlike my electric counterparts, elevation plays a function in that. The opportunity to begin to measure those things and put them together to make a real operative model of the water system combining pressure and velocity is huge, because then it tells us how to operate that system more effectively, improve water quality, improve safety planning. It allows us to be dynamic and real. So those pieces are huge advantages going forward, and we're seeing things such as Curb or other information devices to communicate data just of storage tanks. It doesn't have to be in a remote telemetry system. It can be on the same network. You can use that same network to monitor lighting or even electric together in those pieces. As we begin to mold those things together with metadata from the whole rest of the world and the other sensors that are out there in the world, it becomes much more intelligent and gives us a huge opportunity to improve efficiency in operations.
Just to take a moment to dimensionalize the opportunity and the challenge, for instance, with water. Here in the US, I think most consensus estimates put it that we lose 14 to 18% on average of the water we extract, treat, and pump to the customer before it ever reaches the customer. And that doesn't include what's lost on the customer premise. I was in Brazil last week. I was telling these guys, they are losing 36% of the water they extract, pump, and treat for the customers. So that idea of identifying leaks very quickly and precisely where they are, using these networks to do that, and bring together various data sets to find them and prevent those sort of things, as well as providing that type of service and information to the end customer for a running toilet, for a leaky irrigation system, whatever it is. The opportunity there is huge, and there's similar technical and non-technical losses on the electric side. So I think the point to make here is, from a smart cities perspective, energy and water are foundational initial apps that move the needle and justify the investment, and then there's much more we can do beyond that.
One of the things.
John, hang on one second. Hey guys, you need to have a conversation. Go ahead and step out, okay? I appreciate that you're interested, but we want people to hear behind you. Go
So
ahead.
one of the other things I would say that's corollary to that on the electric side is that when we put in smart meters, early on it was around the volumetric and billing, but the reality is the infrastructure of most electric utilities, voltage is regulated at the substation, and everything below that is modeled. And so you really don't have good granular insight of what's going on. So when you put in smart meters, now you can see what the voltage is at the end use, if it's a end of the line residence. And so one of the things that we did, to your point, is we went into our circuits and say, okay, well, now we know what the voltage really is. We can actually stay within the range of acceptable voltage, but lower the voltage, which is essentially mining energy efficiency from your own system that customers don't have to pay for, but they get the benefit of it on their bill. So starting to look at infrastructure, not single points like your street lights and just metering them, but starting to say, how do we, maybe there's a demand response thing, we can take some of the street lights down, put sensors on them. There's a lot of energy efficiency that can be mined from the infrastructure that now having a network gives you the ability to see it in that macro level. And I think those are great opportunities for city managers.
So one additional point that I think Tim was making is water and electricity really form a huge portion of the city's financial activities. So in preparation here, I looked at the city of Austin's consolidated financial report. They spend $453 million to operate the water and wastewater system every year. And as Tim said, the loss from those systems is frequently high. I don't know what Austin's is in particular, but a little bit of savings in those areas provide a lot of opportunity for the city to spend in other places to improve the quality of life, cultural, education, safety, those things that really bring a city smarter and more livable and sustainable going forward.
Good for you. Excellent. Anybody else while we're out here at this point? Because we've definitely deviated. Let me go ahead and hold yours, give you number 2, and we'll let this gentleman in the back row go ahead and ask his first. Yes, sir.
I just had a question on the line of the keynote this morning. Who owns the data in the sense of who measures it, or who takes it, or who distributes it? You know, this is going to become a problem at some point in time. I think that have we addressed that? The whole conversation here seems to think that the utility, the servicing company owns the data, and I think some customers would disagree.
That's a really fascinating question, and it's the source of a lot of discussion right now. I will tell you, I can't speak for every utility, but the utilities I've been affiliated with would say that the customer owns the data, but they're not going to release it without the customer's permission. So there's both an ownership issue and there's a privacy issue, because there's a lot of people say, well, this data should just be free so other people can utilize it, they can aggregate it, they can do so. And I guess my inclination would be, as a customer, not as a utility person, I want to own my own data, but I also want to have transparency around if anybody seeks to resell my data or give it to somebody else, I want to have an affirmative vote in that taking place. And so this discussion is a very big one frankly, nationally, and it's a big one elsewhere. We've had things like the green button where people will say, well, just agree to give all your customer data for the benefit of others. And I just think most people, most utilities that I'm affiliated with would not say the utility owns the data, but they would not, again, provide it without customers' permission.
One or two quick points to add on to that. In addition to what John said, I think we're seeing utilities and regulators in a number of jurisdictions sort of develop what I'd call a federated data ownership model where, yes, the customer owns the data, that's what the policy says. What that may mean in a practical sense at this point is still up in the air a little bit. The utility owns the data for its business processes and billing. The utility also owns the aggregated data for managing its system, its network more effectively at a higher level. And but I think one of the things that's really going to drive smart city innovation is solving that problem so you can put that data out there openly. Maybe it needs to be anonymized initially in some way, but making that data accessible to the innovators out there is what's going to drive some interesting stuff, and that's a nut we have to crack here to really broaden the value stream.
So the concept of owning data is an interesting one, especially today when we look at various intellectual property rights issues. And this has come up recently for Curb. We're in the midst of negotiating a co-branding arrangement with major panel manufacturers, so it's circuit breaker panel with a curve built into it. And this question of data ownership has come up there, between which brand owns it, which customers own it, who has the right to talk to who. And our legal counsel has advised us that there's actually no such thing as owning data. But all we can really talk about is who has what rights to access and do what with the data. So whether or not that's true, I think it's an informative perspective to try on as we think about information as this ephemeral recording of events that have happened in the past. And it seems to make sense that the consumers would certainly have the rights to download and have access to their data, because they're going to move from home to home, and it would certainly be useful to be able to compare how one set of behaviors by the same set of people in one building compares with that same set of people in a different property at a different point in time. So why shouldn't it move with that person?
Why wouldn't that drive a secondary market to block data at your residence wall, so to say? To block the information. Whatever you get outside of our residence, you have that attitude towards it. But I would think we're gonna create a secondary market where you're not gonna be able to see the granular information inside the house that some people talk about, or inside the business, so to say.
Well, it certainly could be the case. That there's a wall there. So the smart meter gives you one level of resolution from the outside, and a curb or a curb competitor gives you a higher resolution data inside. I think what we're seeing, for example, with solar installers who package a curb type device with their installation is that as a fleet management tool, that the advisory concierge services that somebody outside of the home can offer across a block of neighborhoods is of value to those customers to have that go both ways.
I really think this is a very important societal discussion, and getting the data governance right is important, because again, I think there's a lot of individuals, even I know that although a small number in the grand scheme of things, we had people that opted out of smart meters. They did not want them. They were concerned over a variety of reasons, but one of them was privacy. They did not want. So to me, the question is, how do you create a system where the data is available, that people have some ability to opt into what it is they want their data used for? And I think getting all of that defined is important, because when I think about my iPhone, I download the apps I want, and I look at those apps, and some of them I allow to monitor me, some I don't, but it's my profile, and I'm determining it.
So is your point of that one essentially, whomever is responsible or whomever has access to the data needs to show the value to a consumer, whomever creates the data, why they would choose to share it or let it be publicly available?
My sense is people just need to be able to have the information they need to make an informed choice about, I'm willing to trade off this privacy for this benefit. And if I choose to do it, that's fine. But what I wouldn't want to have is a circumstance where you unwittingly had your data provided to somebody and used without it being anonymous, kind of without your knowledge. I think that's the question.
Totally fair.
You know, looking to privacy laws in the EU is certainly helpful as we do this here.
We're bumping up against our end of this here. I know you had one more, unless somebody else wants to jump in before your follow-up. Ma'am, go ahead.
So, Freeman with PNPGL. We recently helped the government of Dubai come up with some building code processes, because they're interested in increasing energy efficiency of buildings. And their concern is when you have a real estate transaction, being able to see data on energy consumption, so that you can make comparisons on, on this apartment, that apartment, and recognize that a certain portion of energy consumption is hardwired to that unit versus behavioral.
dealt with it a little bit differently in California, so interesting to that. We had this idea that we thought, well, wouldn't it be great to provide transparency for consumers at the point of sale? So if you sell a home, you have to have some sort of a termite inspection, and you have to do certain things. So you would know if you had any defects in your home. Well, likewise, we thought it'd be a good idea to have what is the energy performance of this home, and have that be an element that informed the sale. Because California, they had Title 24, which is building codes. They've had it since 1979, but 11 million homes weren't under Title 24. They were built prior. So how do you give people information on the performance of those homes, and when there was no standards? And so the only thing we really learned in the process is how powerful the real estate lobby was. Because they said, no way, you're not going to do this because it'll slow the transaction or maybe create a problem in the transaction. So we never got there, but the idea is one that's talked about a lot, and it makes perfect sense because the building shells and the building performance is probably the biggest single energy sink there is, and having a way to inform consumers or building owners of what the next best steps they might take, I think that's a great idea.
You know, it's a competitive advantage. So whether or not the real estate body buys into it, you know, I haven't bought that many homes, you know, but in most of the cases that I bought homes, I've asked for utility bills to get a sense of it. And at Curb, we're modeling this issue specifically, right? One is the people who move want to be able to take their data with them to have continuity. But then you also want to be able to pass that to the new occupant of that particular building so that they can get the value of comparing. Wow, before they were doing this well and we're doing this poorly, what are we doing wrong? Or we're doing a lot better, what are we doing right? And how do we spread that information?
I know there's a few companies that are taking a different approach to what you're doing at Curb, that they're trying to get the raw feed going through the meter, and they're using some smart ways of disaggregating that load. So they can see when your compressor's kicked on, and they can differentiate between your dryer, your HVAC, and your fridge. So they're trying to model what's in your house and what kind of appliances you have, and the age of the meter, disaggregating that load. So in that case, as they disaggregate that load without measuring directly like you're doing, then they actually also have a data stream that's approximate to what you have, but it gives them information. They can claim they're on this side of the demarc point, so they own that, and they can kind of feed it to you. And you know, utilities are long known when I'm sure that when my kids moved out of the house, I'm sure they would tell my kids moved out of the house. They can just send me stuff like that. I'm sure they can do that, but you know, here's what you should do. And or they can find people growing marijuana in a mobile home that's got uses of a 4,000 square foot house, right? So I think there's a bit of a Pandora's box in utilities because that data is always transactional for billing. They've not acted on it, but they're looking at acting on it, and they don't have to actually sometimes be in the house to estimate what's going on in that house.
So you can do that to a certain degree, but I'll tell you that the data science work to get there, if all you measure are the mains, is a long ways out. And we've tested all the competitors, those who just put 2 CTs on the mains, and those who put 12 or 18 or 36 CTs. It's the difference between trying to disaggregate all the 50 or 100 different devices and appliances inside of a home off of the mains is like taking those 50 or 100 fingerprints that are all on 1 square inch right on top of each other and trying to make sense out of it, as opposed to having 18 or 36 separate square inches, each of them with 1 or 2 or 5 fingerprints, and then applying those same data science methods to it to really make sense out of it. They've got a real long ways to go. And if you have the same model of TV, for example, in different rooms, then there's no way for that disaggregation to ever tell which room is being occupied. And because it can't tell which room is being occupied, it can't automate the systems that then tell the HVAC system to keep that room cool, and the other rooms don't have to bother with it. So if you want to create automation and really make it a smart home, you need to know where in the house the activity is going on.
I appreciate all the interaction from everybody here. Unfortunately, we have another panel coming in after us. The gentleman will take a few moments. We can probably move some of the additional questions out into the hallway. Thank you again very much for your time, guys.